And certainly our missionary background challenges this very strongly, because we actually are seeking to cross cultures for the sake of the gospel. And so have to work against that and actually see that working out in the church anyway, through history, that it crosses cultures and language barriers, cultural barriers, socio-economic barriers, age barriers. So all those sorts of things. I think generally speaking, it's a fairly typical way in which people tend to coalesce and group together in like groups. But I think the gospel actually challenges us to break down that.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Shock Absorber podcast, and it is a slightly different one today. My name, of course, is Joel, and I am the usual co-host of the Shock Absorber podcast. But with me today, I have two new co-hosts, because unfortunately Stu is not here today. He had to go for a COVID test. But I do have two other pastors from Soul Revival Church, who are Jai McMordie.
Hello.
Say hello. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. And Paul Tait. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you.
Excellent.
Hello to everybody out there.
Yes, hello everyone. We are, of course, as I said last week, coming in through your ears and also through your eyeballs if you are watching us on YouTube.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. Lately, we've been, in this season, we've been going through the history of Soul Revival Church, and when we began back at the end of 2011 and starting in 2012. Last week also, Jai, we talked about Woolooware, which is kind of, you came on board to start planning Woolooware as our first off-site campus. So we are travelling through the history of Soul Revival, and you guys are part of that history of Soul Revival, even as a little bit more recent. But I thought it'd be worth, before we get into the church history, you get into your history. So, Jai, do you want to lead us off? I thought I'd ask you, how did you first become a Christian? And then what led you to become a pastor?
Good questions. So I became a Christian sort of late teens, so it would have been sort of 19. I was actually non-Christian family, so Jesus and sort of church were not something that were on my radar. I had a lot of friends through high school who invited me along to come to Soul's youth group, and in the way that I used to talk back then, I used to tell them what I thought about going to church and youth group and things like that.
What's the broadcastable version of that? What would you say?
Basically, I tell them where they could shove it.
Okay.
So that kind of idea, but with more colourful language, really.
Yep.
Weekends were more about sport and drinking and those sorts of things, really, for me. And I just happened, it was during soccer season, it was in April, I think, of 97, if I remember rightly. Right. And our soccer team that I was playing for was sponsored by Gymea Pub. We'd been up there. I was filling in for another team the next day, and so therefore wasn't drinking on one of those rare occasions, and I had to walk past Gymea Anglican Church on my way home, which is where Solies were doing a big youth night. And some of my friends from school were walking in and invited me in, and I couldn't think of an excuse not to go in. And so went in and started getting sat through some craziness, and then heard Stu actually speak about how much God loves us, that he sent his son Jesus to die for us, and how he actually, this God who loved me so much to give up his only son, where I was at that moment, and still even today, it was just such a big thing to hear that someone loved me that much. And that just made such a big difference. And from there, I became a Christian with Stu, and that night I became a Christian, I felt like I could run around the block. I was just like, I don't know what it was. I was full of energy, and I just wanted to run. I didn't know how else to express my joy in what I'd done and what God had done in me through his son Jesus. So yeah, it was really exciting. And I would like to think that I probably slowed down physically, but spiritually I feel hopefully I'm still running just as hard as I did then.
Well, as I shared with Stu last week, that you were a youth leader, and you were my youth leader. Yeah. So I think I first met you when I was in year 9, so we've known each other for a long time. And then being part of the Soul Revival ministry at Gymea, and then having to, you went out from there and went to Helensburgh Anglican and then Nowra Anglican. Yeah. But I thought, just go back a little bit, what led you to decide you wanted to be a pastor?
It was funny because I actually went to Bible college part-time while I worked for people like yourself, the guys I was leading youth group. I realised that I hadn't grown up in the church. I hadn't been a Christian for particularly all that long before I started youth leading, and I felt like I needed to know more about the Bible, and I wanted to supercharge that and do that as quickly as I could. And so Matt Reb and I, we went to Bible college and started doing that, and really all it was me trying to know the Bible more so I could lead people like yourself, the kids I was leading youth group, to lead them better and to be able to help them know the Bible better.
Right.
And it was just through that I then had, the generosity of one of the people at church at the time actually paid for me to go to college because I couldn't afford to do it. And he said, I'm not, that's not where I'm at, that's not where I'm heading, but God has blessed me with some money, extra money and I want to support people like yourself to go to college. So that was super awesome because I wouldn't have been able to do it. And then had some other people slowly over time say, hey, you should really kind of think about maybe going into full-time ministry. And it was only then that I started thinking about, is this where I'm meant to be? But I don't think I would have thought about that if I hadn't had a couple of sort of the older members of our church encourage me to do that. So I only got into it because, some older members of our church saw God at work in me through college and through ministries and things like that, and thought, maybe he might have something about being a pastor. Maybe he might be able to be decent or something. So hopefully, I'm half decent enough. And
you are.
And, so that's, I kind of fell into it in a way. I didn't go looking for it. But,
Well, sometimes the way that you talk about yourself is that you're quite humble, and I think I have learnt a lot about Jesus through your actions and how you've led us. I was going to say, you obviously went out from Gymea when you would had to go. I think you went to Helensburgh, and Nowra. What did you learn in that time of your ministry? What was the biggest thing that you learned before you actually came to Soul Revival Church?
I think I learnt from some very good senior ministers at both of those churches, who I consider good friends and great role models. But I think the thing I learnt from all of them is how, in the face of whatever we're going through, trusting in Jesus through the good and through the bad is for long-term ministry. If you're not doing that, then you're really kind of just going on your own strength. And so all those guys really encouraged me to just really be, working on my relationship with Jesus. Mm. And so, so I think that's the big thing that I've learned, just how important that relationship is with Jesus in any ministry.
Cool. Paul, sorry to keep you waiting. Let's move over to you. Yeah, it was
great listening.
Yes, it was actually, wasn't it?
I'm looking forward to hearing something else.
Yeah, exactly.
Some crackers as well.
Because we probably haven't known you for as long. We shared how Joe and I knew each other for a long time, Paul. But I think you've had quite a storied ministry journey as well. Do you want to start us off with how you became a Christian and then how you got into ministry?
Yeah, sure. I had the privilege of growing up in a church-going family. So as young as I can remember going to Sunday school and hearing about Jesus and that sort of thing. But it was in the teenage years where the pennies started to drop. In particular, I remember being at confirmation, which is like a certain process that you go through as being a young Anglican child, taking on the vows that godparents made for you at a christening. You take them on yourself. And I can still remember the minister sitting me down for a lesson one day and just said, Paul, why are you doing this? And the very first thing that popped into my head was, Mum wants me to do it. Oh. And I just thought, thankfully, I just thought it. I didn't say it.
You probably weren't the only one thinking
it. It was right there on the tip of my tongue. And I just thought, that's not the answer. That's not the right one. And it just, a whole bunch of things profoundly ticked over in my brain. I just realised, it's not a hereditary thing. It's not the fact that I've just gone to church all my life and been in a family that goes to church and that sort of thing. There's something more to this than that. Mm-hmm. And so hence started my process of actually personalising my faith, actually realising that it was about walking with Jesus and being personally following him, obeying him, and understanding that. probably there was a whole bunch of things over the next probably 5 or 6 years. I was in my mid-teens about then, that I still needed to work out and change in my lifestyle. And so probably the next big things that happened were once I went to university, and there again had a great blessing of being part of a very big Christian university group that had lots of great Bible teaching and lots and lots of peers that were actually living out their faith as well. And that was also the thing that started deepening my faith and also leading me on a path towards full-time ministry.
Right. And so if you're leading yourself on a path to full-time ministry, how did that really manifest for you? Were you like Johnny, like, oh crap, I've got to know much more about the Bible if I'm going to lead people, or what was the real catalyst for that?
I think part of it was just the university scene was quite exciting. Lots of people there, lots of Christians, a heady environment. In some ways, literally heady, and you've got to think a lot.
Yep.
Lots of ideas being thrown around, lots of discussions. We were young and had heaps of time, no responsibility, and just a great time to let that whole element of your Christian faith grow and mature. We were seeing people become Christians, so it was a very evangelistic time. So it was just very, very exciting. Alongside of that, there was I was able to receive great Bible teaching that was really inspiring, and come to understand how moving and challenging the Bible is, and the call that God has over my life. And so I was sort of not so much panicking about, I need to know more. It was more just the excitement of it all. And seeing people as well, not too far ahead of where I was in my life stage, taking the step to do ministry training. So there was a group called the Ministry Training Strategy that was just starting up then, and we were seeing guys that were only like 3 and 4 years ahead of where we were, had taken the step to leave their professions and do Christian ministry and then go to Bible college. And so I think that environment of watching people only a few stages ahead, I think they're not that different to me. They're also moved by the gospel. And so I just thought that's what offered the opportunity for me to step further and further towards Christian ministry. Yeah, and right. So that's what probably in my early 20s make that decision to go to Bible college.
What university were you at, sorry?
I was at the New South Wales University.
Okay, cool.
So campus Bible study.
Yep.
And there was a very big team of very good Bible teachers there. Yep. That were challenging us constantly.
Yeah, that's cool.
It was great.
And so you went to Moore College, is that right? The Anglican Training College?
Yep. So after I did 2 years of ministry apprenticeship at the University of New South Wales, I got married during that time.
Very nice. Your wife, Lyndall.
And then we went to Moore College.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. And so where did you obviously graduated from Moore College?
Eventually.
Yeah. What led you, because I know like you've been to Russia, for example.
Yeah.
What led you to all those kind of things? Was there a particular thing as well?
Yeah, I think we were moving around Sydney through that period of ministry training. And so we were initially in the eastern suburbs near the University of New South Wales. After that, we moved out into the western suburbs, out past Parramatta. During that time, we got involved with a couple of cross-cultural Bible ministries, which were very exciting. Not only that, we were involved in certain times involved with sort of a number of ethnic ministries. We involved with an urban mission that was at Liverpool, and it was very, very exciting to watch how open other cultures were to the gospel, in many ways more open to the gospel than Anglo cultures. So that sort of started to twig some heartstrings for cross-cultural ministry. And so it was at Bible College where we kept encouraging that. We kept just praying for missionaries. And then we started to see that potentially we could do that. Lyndall was very keen to do that as well. So we were of one mind in that regard.
And that's good.
Yeah,
Wasn't just going, hey, let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, she was the one that was keener to go.
Okay.
She'd actually had doubled with languages. German was one of the languages she did, but she also did some Russian language at university, and that's where our vision started turning towards Eastern Europe, and then opportunities to go with the Church Missionary Societies, who we went with. They were able to send us to a place in Russia for a period of time.
Now, can you remind me of the city? Sorry, is it Kazan?
The city's called Kazan,
Yep.
yes, about 800 kilometres east of Moscow.
Right. It's because the only way I remember cities in lots of European countries is through football teams.
Yep.
So I've heard of Rubin Kazan. As
That's
the team.
right. They won the Russian competition and
Yeah.
got into the Champions League a couple of times.
After they got there was a lot of oil-rich money coming into the club, I believe. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. As there are many sporting teams that are basically owned by a lot of very rich people that.
After the Soviet Union was split up,
That's
they
right.
got a lot of oil.
Questionable origins as to where all that wealth came from.
Yep.
But a few of the sporting teams in Kazan were owned by particularly wealthy guys, and so actually got quite good players.
Yes.
So we actually at some points had the best ice hockey team, best soccer team, and best basketball team. Because they were throwing some serious money at and getting a lot of international players to come and join the teams.
Yeah, I remember Samuel Eto'o, I think, played for Rubin Kazan. I might get that, the Cameroonian star. Anyway, we'll move on. We'll move on from football. Sorry, but
they also hosted Australia in the last World Cup.
Yes, they did. Yeah, that's right.
So it was a city that had a fair bit of pride to invest in its infrastructure, which was good because not every city was like that.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you, what was it like being in Russia?
The best thing about it was actually joining other brothers and sisters in Christ. Amazing to see that God, Jesus, is building his church all throughout the world, and that within days we had no prior contact to that country or that place, yet within days we'd connected with a local church family, and always felt welcome and at home there. And it was just amazing to be part of that, and then to be part of that group that continued to grow and be part of seeing a church grow in that town. And so it was just amazing. That was the biggest blessing, to actually see that the gospel does indeed cross cultures, and so to see that and be part of it was just an incredible privilege.
How long were you there for in total?
We were there for about 7 years.
Wow.
There, and then probably over a 10-year period in and out through that period.
Yep.
Coming back for times of fundraising back here in Australia, and then and children being born, things like this. So that was an interesting process as well.
Yeah,
so,
of course. And my final question for your personal history is, how did you, with Jaya, for example, he's often been part of Soul Revival on and off for quite a while. How did you come to Soul Revival Church, and why did God lead you here?
Yeah, well, when we came back from Russia, we moved into the Arncliffe, Rockdale area, and were involved with the ministry in Arncliffe. Then I went back and worked with the Church Missionary Society for a little bit of time. And it was actually, we were renting a church property house in Rockdale, and they were starting to think about they might needed to sell that property. And our kids are in a stage of life, at that stage of transition, moving from primary school to high school. And our daughter knew some people at Kirrawee High, and so she thought, well, I'd like to maybe join them. And it was just an open map for us. Where do we want to? Where do we need? We sort of needed to move. Where would we move? And we were transitioning out of our church as well, and so we moved into Kirrawee, just down the road, to actually be in the catchment zone for the high school, because that was a bit tricky. If you weren't in the catchment zone, it was very hard to get to the school. So we moved into that catchment zone, and we heard about this church. We wandered up the street, quite literally walked 5 minutes up the road, and came in, I think it was 2014.
Yeah.
So I think that you've only been here for a couple of weeks in the factory.
I think that's right.
A couple of months or so.
I suppose we're talking about the next stages of Soul Revival Church. But I thought maybe in terms of one question there, is it a little bit different for you, Jai? You've both experienced, both you and Paul have both experienced the differences between intergenerational ministry and perhaps a different style. Usually we like to term that the homogeneous unit principle. I'm just wondering what you guys think of that, because often our listeners will hear about what Stu obviously thinks about that. But I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on feedback. So, Jai, do you want to hit us with that first? We'll go with Paul first.
Yeah. I don't mind, but I just thought I went first last time.
All right,
sharing as well.
I mean, I guess in talking generally about that principle, I mean, it's been in discussion a bit recently. We can see how people. My understanding of the principle was it was observational. That people just observe that people tend to connect with people who they feel they are like. That is, that they look like, that they sound like, that they have similar interests. That seems to be fairly common across all sorts of experiences of life. But of course, in ministry, that's not necessarily the case. And certainly our missionary background challenges this very strongly, because we actually are seeking to cross cultures for the sake of the gospel. And so have to work against that and actually see that working out in the church anyway, through history, that it crosses cultures and language barriers, cultural barriers, socio-economic barriers, age barriers. So all those sorts of things. I think generally speaking, it's a fairly typical way in which people tend to coalesce and group together in like groups, but I think the gospel actually challenges us to break down that and smash those sorts of thoughts that just that sort of practice, which is to be always comfortable and with my own people. It tells us to take the gospel out, and often to people that are different to us. Yeah.
Well, would it surprise you that I agree with you? Because yes, we are part of this church. Joy, would you have any thoughts on that too?
A couple of thoughts. So I guess in Nowra we experienced people that were quite different to us. And as Paul said, everybody needs to hear the gospel, no matter who they are, what background they come from. And so being open to all backgrounds, all cultures, all people is very biblical and what we're on about. And in terms too of, I guess, I've got kids that are growing up, teenagers and primary age kid. The fact that having a church family that is so multi-generational, who have experienced life and are able to share their experiences with kids, teenagers with kids, adults with kids, grandparents, all those sorts of things, is such a awesome expression of the biblical reality of the church that we see through Acts and throughout the Bible, of doing life together, learning together, instead of people turning to things like YouTube and whatever else to get their cues on life and social things and how to grow up and what to be as they grow up. And so just being able to see young and old and everyone in between mixing in together and sharing and doing life together, instead of pushing each other to the side saying, oh, you're too young, you're too old, or you're not like me, all those sorts of things, just everybody coming together and actually having an impact on each other. I remember reading an article with stats about teenagers, kids as they transition into high school, looking for mentors without actually realising that's what they're doing. And as parents, we can be intentional by actually matching up our kids with older teenagers, young adults, so that there is good influence there. But unless we're intentional about it, then they end up looking for people, and who knows where it ends up. And the great thing about, I guess, doing intergenerational church is that we already have that here. you don't have to go looking for them because we set up church to be just that. So so I think a couple of things there.
Yeah, I was reflecting on something like that with my wife. I remember reading a different article that talked about how I have children younger than you, of course, but if children that are able to spend a lot of time with their grandparents end up being a lot more well-rounded and highly influenced by them because they have that mentoring aspect. But I think if we are having that in an intergenerational church, we have that on a constant basis as well. I think that's something that I didn't grow up with, and I'm really, really thankful that my children are growing up into that situation where we've talked about previously on episodes with Stu about how we don't really see the children just as the future of the church. They're part of our church right now. Yeah. So if we're starting that from that very beginning, I think that's a really important thing to help them be growing up, first of all, in a Christian community, but then also into a community where it is many, many ages. And one of my favorite things that we always talk about is Jesus' death on the cross doesn't just reconcile us with God, it reconciles us to each other. And I think that expressing that in an intergenerational way really, really, it's a helpful way for our children to see that reality that Jesus has done that for us with God and also with each other.
Oh, 100%. I just heard a story today I didn't even realise happened on the weekend, that my youngest son Nate was down at Yarrawarra helping set up sound gear with Cuz down there, and they ended up having this great conversation and talked about sound gear and microphones and music and all sorts of things as they were doing it. And I didn't even know this had happened.
Yeah, right.
But it's just, fantastic just that, Cuz is my age and, Nate's 10 and here's these two guys, doing something together, but also
and also
to know each other.
And where else would that happen? But also under God as well. I think that's what we love about it.
Yeah, 100%.
I'm glad that you brought up Yarrawarra, because now again let's get back into the history of Soul Revival Church. We talked last episode about Woolooware, where you were a very integral part of starting that gathering. Our first gathering that was off-site, away from our main Kirrawee campus, the factory where we are right now. Can you tell us, we end up coming up with the next stage of the growth of Soul Revival, or the changes of Soul Revival, that we came up with this ambitious goal of planting 2 gatherings almost at the same time. Yep. And both you and Paul were in part of those meetings and decisions to do that. Can you tell us how we got to that point before we actually decided to plant those gatherings?
Yeah, it was actually Karen Sell, our training pastor, and I were at some church planting thing, and we came back and said, "Hey, we should do 2 in one go. Give it a go. We're experimenting. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Oh well, at least we gave it a go." Yep. It's kind of our attitude to a lot of stuff, which is really relaxing and refreshing.
Well, we like to experiment.
We do, and we're not not afraid if things don't work out or to tweak things. And so Karen and I came back and said, "Oh, we think we can do it." And Stu, being as awesome as he is, they said, "Okay, let's give it a go." Yeah. And so it's kind of how it came about, is we just said, let's try this experiment of doing 2. We've done 1. Let's see if we can do 2. If we can't, we'll see what we can learn.
Paul, when Joy and Karen came back with that idea, did you think they were crazy?
I think there was certainly a lot of enthusiasm and optimism of saying, well, let's go. Woolooware was up and going and rolling and looking strong, and so I think there was a positive vibe about, hey, let's see if we can do it again. And there was two specific places, I think, why we also were there just to pull us along. Yarrawarra was a particular, a space, a suburb that we were keen to sort of do something there, if I understand correctly.
Yep.
I wasn't on staff at the time. We'd had good conversations with the local Anglican church that was within that parish, and so they were quite encouraging and told us to go for it.
Yep.
And the other time, which was the Sunday afternoon here at Kirrawee, again there was a bit of a growing enthusiasm to have a presence at that time over the weekend. So I think that Yarrawarra and the Sunday afternoon were sort of good options that were out there.
Yeah. We didn't come running in and go, we should do it in Timbuktu and where else. There was good reasons why we excited about those two and wanted to give those two a go.
Yeah. So let's focus on Yarrawarrah for a second. If there were good reasons, what were those reasons?
Well, we talk a lot about hub and spoke. I know Stu talks about that. And Yarrawarrah is about that 20-minute window that we talk about, 20 minutes outside of our main campus here. And so that fitted in there. There's no church in Yarrawarrah or Loftus in terms of Anglican churches. And we had a few people who lived out that way, and we thought, it would be a good opportunity to help reach out into that sort of Engadine, Yarrawarrah, Warrenora Heights, all that sort of space, because
the areas of the Sutherland Shire, if anyone's not part of the Shire. Yep.
Yes, that way. And as Paul said, James at Engadine Anglican was really for it too, because such a large area, and he was very keen for more churches to be there to reach out to more people.
It's very similar to, as we were speaking about Woolooware last episode, we went and spoke to the Anglican minister there, and he was very encouraging too. So we're really thankful for those guys being encouraging to actually do that.
Well, James actually came and announced it for us at one of our planning days.
Oh, did he?
He came and announced that we were going to launch into Yarrawarrah. So that was another beautiful thing about that friendship.
Being part of the ecosystem of churches that Stu likes to talk about.
Yes.
All right, if you can give us, how did we start Yarrawarrah? So greenhouse, is that usual process that we did?
Yeah, so then we were still using the greenhouse terminology. So we greenhoused, I think, end of 2018, both of them at the same time.
Okay.
And because we were thinking we would do bits and pieces together and split up, if I remember rightly.
Is that correct, Paul?
Is that right?
Can you confirm?
A bit of fact checking.
We may have had maybe one together gathering, but I remember we were pretty much separate.
We might have done the first 3 together, maybe.
May have, yeah.
And then we split up because we did them in 4, and so or maybe it was the first one. I don't know. We did do some together, and then we split up because obviously there was different things we needed to focus on as we moved along the process. Being here meant that there was already equipment here, and you didn't need to transport stuff. Being at Yarrawarrah meant we needed to transport things, and so little different things we needed to work on. But end of 2018 we started the greenhouse process for both of those two things.
And part of that process, I'm guessing, was Paul, confirm for me again, if you can, is looking at our theology, strategy and practice, which are the main ways that we like to look at how we're actually going to plan a gathering. So obviously our theology stays the same as Jesus changes everything. Our strategy is sharing the love of Jesus person to person, generation to generation, culture to culture, place to place. Yep. There we go, got them all.
Well done.
But I would assume that with Yarrawarrah and Sunday afternoon, the practice would differ a little bit. I just know that we always wanted to keep an all-age, all-stage gathering, but I thought maybe you guys can kind of run them side by side and tell them how they differed and how they were the same. Would that be something that you'd be able to run us through? So, Paul, on Sunday afternoon...
Sunday afternoon had a few advantages. I think actually we probably, by the time we were probably quicker through the greenhouse stage than Yarrawarrah, simply because we had the infrastructure already in place.
And we already had 3 gatherings at Kirrawee prior to that.
Yeah, yes. And we had a venue.
And we had a venue.
Yes.
So basically we met here in the factory. Meals, we were just doing an evening meal, and so it was all here ready. Kitchen's all here ready to go, and we just had to simply divvy up all their responsibilities amongst the launch team, the core team, and we had a few more. Our numbers were a bit bigger too. Yarrawarrah was quite a lean beginning.
Another experiment.
That's right. So, we were not so brave. And so we had a few more people on team here, and so I think that's what helped us to get through the greenhouse process a bit quicker. And I think we started having public gatherings, I think probably about February of 2019. Again, and we had a lot of things in place, and so that sort of got up and rolling. We had a couple of families come and join us, so we had a bit of a kids program happening right from the get-go. So there was they'll advantages for us to get that. I wouldn't say we had a critical mass from the outset, but there was at least a momentum that helped us to roll forward.
And you're saying, Jai, that probably wasn't the same for Yarrawarra in the beginning?
Yeah, we needed to find a venue.
Yes.
Which took a little bit of time, and then working out how we use that venue, those sorts of things. So it just took a little bit longer for us to get up and running. And I think you might have started with 12 or 14 or something like that.
That's great.
Yarrawarra, we started with 8, which is the smallest attempt so far, I think.
Yes, I think so.
And so, it was an experiment to see how few people we could have on team to get something going. Mm-hmm. And, so it took a little bit longer. But I guess in terms of the similarities and differences, time of day was probably the big one. Mm. So you would do dinner, we start off doing a breakfast, kind of similar to what we do Sunday morning here.
Because Yarrawarra was going to be a Sunday morning, wasn't it?
So it still is. And it was Sunday morning, we'd do breakfast before church, where you guys would do dinner afterwards.
Yep.
And we were in a school hall, and that's where we ended up.
Yes. Very similar to Woolooware.
Yeah. So we thought, we're doing it at Woolooware, we'll give it a go at Yarrawarra. And so we met at Yarrawarra Public School. School hall, school grounds, a bit different to a factory in Kirrawee. And so, there's little nuances there that you need to do things slightly different. So we had instead of having a kitchen with a coffee machine like we do here, we took the caravan like we did at Woolooware. We took that down to do tea and coffee, got a barbecue, all those things, so we could do breakfast and those sorts of things.
I think something that we seem to have learned doing the episode on Woolooware was that speaking about being an experiment, I wonder if many people who want to plant a church see it as an experiment. I don't know you've obviously planted gatherings yourself. Would you agree with that or not?
I think the way that we are doing it, because if we did Yarrawarra and it didn't work, we would come back.
Which is the value of the hub and spoke.
Yeah, so it was building a bridge and we didn't burn the bridges. Where I think a lot of church plants, there's quite a need to make it viable.
Self-sustaining. We were talking about that last time.
Because sometimes whoever the pastor is, they might be relying on that. Actually, the home church might be able to contribute for a certain period of time, and then to get it going, so it takes on the pastor. That can mean that things have got to work a bit quicker and a little bit more stressful. And experimenting is kind of not something you can do straight away. That might be a possibility. It depends on the type of model maybe that you're using to church plant. I don't know what you reckon, Paul.
The churches that we've been part of in the past that we sort of started were, again, it's when they weren't really conscious decisions to plant a church. It was like almost like a bunch of opportunities coalesced before us, and we sort of jumped on a bit of a train that seemed to be rolling and got involved. And in some ways, the ministry of Soul Revival is rolling along with quite a strong core now, and so maybe for the sake of calling things experiments or the other plants, they're not outlandish experiments. They're actually building upon a core that's already rolling along.
Yeah.
I like the language that we use about being an experiment, building a bridge to a new reality. The hub and spoke model allows for that. One of the things that we were discussing last week in our Woolooware episode was there were some things that were going well, and we some other things that didn't go so well, and the things that we learnt from some of the. I mean, the only way you can learn if something works or not is by actually doing it.
Yeah.
And we started coming up with quite a few reasons about why some things weren't working, and actually ended up sounding like Woolooware had actually was not continuing, which isn't true, as you can attest, Jai. So I was just wondering, having done what we would like to call an experiment in planting these two gatherings. What did we learn from it? Did we think that possibly planting with 8 people was too few for Yarrawarra? I know that, for example, in Woolooware, we learnt that we worked out that the school wasn't really working well for how we wanted to do church, because it really, in its effect, was a second place rather than a third place if we're talking about Oldenburg's theory.
Yep.
We'll start with Paul first. What did we learn by planting Sunday afternoon?
Well, once we did get ourselves up and rolling, again with the benefit of having a place to meet, all the infrastructure for meals and gathering in place, we were able to sort of get a momentum fairly quickly. The scenario of actually having the door open more times throughout the weekend, that was one of the things that we were really looking forward to actually being able to do, have the factory open for another chunk of the weekend.
Yep.
Resulted in a lot of people coming to the door. So we did have a number of people come and visit and actually enter the broader fellowship of Soul Revival through Sunday afternoon.
Okay.
As their first stepping in point. And so I sort of lost count how many people that was the case for. So we've noticed that was the case. However, there was broadly two different types of people. Some people might come and go, we like the smaller gathering and we want it to remain small, and we like the intimate experience. But there were probably more that actually came through, had a look, thought that's great, and then they dived off into one of our other bigger gatherings.
That's interesting, isn't it?
So that's what we noticed over the year. So wonderful to see new people joining our fellowship, staying with us or moving on to different gatherings was irrelevant. Really, we were just happy for people to join our fellowship. As the year wore on, though, we were still a small core team. And so even though we might have been all of 12, a lot more than what there might have been for 8, we were still lean in that regard. And so I think as the year did wear on, we realised that we were actually under a fair bit of strain. Just the effort for that meeting to run. Everyone were also all quite keenly involved in another gathering as well over the weekend. So people were backing up and doubling up to sort of come. So that was a bit draining as well. And then as the year drew to a close, some of our key core members were actually people that were going to move on to different ministries altogether. So Dan Gale was with us. The end of 2019 was an interesting time for them as they had premature babies be born, and so he was very preoccupied with that, and then moved on to another ministry in his ongoing formation as an Anglican minister.
Yep.
And so that was he was a real linchpin for a lot of the arts element of our service team on a Sunday night. Not only that, we had Grace and Michelle Huang were part of our fellowship on a Sunday night, who into 2020 had moved across to start the West Ryde gathering as well. So and weren't physically in our area anymore. So there were two big losses, three big losses, three big people that were quite key, integral to our running of the ministry. Not only that, as we rolled on, we also realised that we had some people, some families that were sort of keen for that time slot, but they were also keen for another time slot. And so it was, we realised that we had a bit of a divided group. Sometimes they were keen to be involved on a Sunday afternoon, but then they might need to be involved somewhere else. So our core team started to reduce very quickly. That coupled with the fact that we were getting a bit tireder by having to do a lot of the work quite regularly. And then COVID hit in early 2020, coinciding with that summer period where we were sort of gone into a recess mode, which is like a low key, almost like Bible study format over the summer. And so then as we got to, I think it was February, March, when COVID fully kicked in and we had to sort of stop our gatherings, we started thinking that maybe we might have to put the Sunday afternoon gathering on a hiatus, a period where we might just put it on hold for a while, allow the core team who are all quite heavily involved with other gatherings, let them redouble their efforts in other gatherings, and then we'll see how things go on. But that's sort of what happened. There were great blessings, I guess, seeing people join our fellowship, but then there was also hardships to think we were doing a lot of the work with a small team, and then we started having certain team members move on quite naturally to other ministries. In some ways, we want to see people go and send them out into other ministries as well. And so with that absolute blessing, we Grace and Michelle and Dan, we want to see them go off and bless other ministries as well.
Yeah, I think that was a fantastic summary of what happened at Sunday afternoon. I noticed that one of the things that we keep coming up against is the things that we're learning in these experiments and building a bridge to new reality is the service teams and how important they are to have, as much as we can, the 10 service teams that we've established to be serving at those gatherings each time. Joy, I know that you've been a part of those gatherings and learning about those things that are happening. Did that happen at Yarrawarra as well? Because I mean, the team was obviously smaller than even Paul's team on Sunday afternoon. So you started with 8 at Yarrawarra.
Yeah. We were still definitely in that phase of thinking that we just needed to get 4 of our 10 service teams up and running, and that was all that we needed to get going. And that's, I guess, through Sunday Arvo and Yarrawarra, that's when we started to realise that we'd probably need to have all 10 represented at each of our gatherings. And so, with 8 people, that, my maths is not particularly great, but that, 8 and 10 not exactly work out so well. And, we had, our team of 8 were really solid and excited, and we even had one of our team members actually learnt to play the guitar so that they could lead us in song, which was, an amazing blessing and very, very cool. But yeah, with 8 people, it's a lot of work to do to set up and pack up and all those things, and in a school hall too. It was actually Yarrawarra that helped us realise that the school hall isn't the best place to be, because when we came out of COVID, we had that opportunity to think about somewhere else to meet for Yarrawarra, and we decided that we would try the community hall at Yarrawarra, and it made such a big difference straight away. And it was that point we were like, okay, these questions that we've been having, we've got an answer. And so, this kind of started that, or really solidified the thinking that we had around that.
No, that's really cool. So maybe my last question for both of you guys is the future. That's how we finished when we were talking about Woolaware. Joy, you want to start first? What's the future of Yarrawarra? You said you've now moved to the community hall and it's working. It seems to be working a lot better.
Yep.
It's not as much of a second place as the school. In Oldenburg's theory, he says that people don't go to a second place to have party and community. That's where they go to work or school or anything like that.
Yep.
Is the community hall a third place? And can you have a party there?
Yeah. Well, it's you hire it out for parties, really. So it's one of those things. And we've got our team at Yarrawarra is absolutely amazing. They're phenomenal. They blow me away every week. It's just how tireless they are and how much effort they put in to make this community hall, even though it still looks like a community hall, the way that the people are buzzing around and enjoying being there, it doesn't feel like it. And having the caravan there with an umbrella and stools and barbecues going, it feels more like an outdoor cafe almost. And so for us down there, being able to create that cafe feel for that third space has been really important. We've had a number of people pop in and grab a coffee. And so what we want to work on is continuing to make those contacts, get to know our community, and help them feel comfortable to come, not just to maybe to stay longer as they have a coffee, then maybe even pop their head in and check out what church is like and those sorts of things. So moving forward, that's definitely an area where we'll want to explore and think through. Our caravan's fantastic for that. Gives us that coffee van vibe really well. And as I said, our team down there is absolutely phenomenal. I can't. It's the same with Woolooware and Kirrawee and all of our gatherings. We've got such amazing, gifted and talented teams doing ministry with us. It's absolute blessing. Yep.
That's cool. Paul, we said the Sunday afternoon's on hiatus. Hasn't really come back from hiatus at this point in time. What would be the key thing that you would say after running that experiment? Well,
I guess the hope would be that we would again have it open doors for as much as the weekend as we can here in this location at Kirrawee. There's great opportunities. The opportunities are still before us, like hundreds, thousands of people that are moving into the quite literally onto our doorstep.
Yes.
And so I guess we do have a dream to sort of see a presence again in the afternoon, but we may want to think more carefully about how we build a core team and make sure that's a team that will be able to keep rolling forward. It might mean that we need a bigger critical mass of people to start with. As we're now, again, we're still putting a big effort into the Woolooware and Yarrawarrah situation as well. So, again, it might be a bridge too far just in the immediate future to have another gathering start. But certainly in the future, if we continue to grow as we're seeing numbers grow, then it'd be a great challenge to put before our gatherings to say, let's have another presence again on a Sunday afternoon in this venue. So yeah.
And I think that's a fantastic way to look at it. We're talking about experiments a lot in this episode, and I think it's quite cool to see what God has taught us through those experiments. But He also gives us the freedom, and if we trust in Him, He's going to show us what we actually need to be doing. So I think that'll probably wrap us up for this episode. But I'm really thankful for you guys to join us. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you so much, Jai. It's been a really fun...
Thanks, a pleasure.
That's right. It's been a really fun time to actually see some experiments that worked and some experiments that didn't. So, thank you very much for leading our church in those experiments, and we really appreciate it. Guys, that will wrap us up for episode 9 of season 2. My name is Joel, if you had forgotten, but also if you do have any questions or any comments about anything that we've talked about in the last few seasons, please email me at joel@shogazoa.com.au. We would love to be able to give you some feedback and let you know how we want to actually answer your question. But for the moment, we will leave it there. Thanks again to these guys. Thanks very much for listening and or watching. And as always, we like to finish with a one way. Thanks.